Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great weekend. Our library tour continues as our Shelfie Safari takes us to some strange and forbidding worlds. We have Earth, eons ago, in great tales of sword and sorcery. We have strange steampunk adventures in historical fantasy. We have outer space, both conjured from the human imagination and examined through the lens of hard science. But none of these worlds is as forbidding as the grotto that will kick off our final 6 volumes. Let's get started. We have Roger Zelazny's Great Book of Amber. Woohoo! This is a fun one. This collects the first 10 of the Chronicles of Amber. There's 2 5-book sequences. Each of them, the books were published like almost one a year. And then there's like a 7-year gap in between them. I love the first 5. This books 6 through 10 are interesting, but the first 5 just are a great adventure. The siblings that populate them are great. They're so carefully sketched, and the concept of the cards and the way they can be used to sort of call and summon the siblings is fantastic. I would love to see an adaptation of this. I love the interesting world that Zelazny builds. And I will also add that I think the way the siblings were sketched in those first 5 books was a big influence on Neil Gaiman when he wrote the Sandman comics, and he has Dream, Destiny, Destruction, Death, Delirium, Desire. He has all of them, and the way they operate as siblings within that comic sequence, I think that was influenced by Zelazny. I absolutely love these. The first 5 books, I'll list those in case you want to check out any. 9 Princes in Amber, The Guns of Avalon, Sign of the Unicorn, The Hand of Oberon, and The Courts of Chaos. You can find those as little mass market paperbacks. You can find them in, I think there's like a 2 hardcover sequence that collects those 5 books, or they're in here. Great, highly recommended. Then I have Roberty Howard. I have a whole stack of Roberty Howard we're going to take a look at. There are the best of Roberty Howard. So I have only volume 1, which is Crimson Shadows. Volume 2 was Grim Lands. Each of those books collects a maximum of 2 pieces from any one of Howard's characters. So there's 2 Conan stories, 2 Solomon Kane stories, 2 Kull stories, 2 Bran stories. But that makes space then for some of the really interesting adventure stories, boxing stories, horror stories that Howard wrote that are very good. This one has The Grey God Passes, which is one of my favorite Roberty Howard stories. And then his poems are in these as well. So Crimson Shadows might be sort of the one, if you're only going to have one book from Howard, that might be the one to pick, or it might be one of the Conan books. We'll see. Then there's a whole series that focus on single characters. So Kull, Exile of Atlantis. This was a prototype for what would later become Conan. The first Conan story was a rewrite of a Kull story. And Kull's interesting. Kull, Bran, and Conan sort of can be grouped together as ruler warriors. And they have differences. They have their interesting little idiosyncrasies, and they're very unique characters. I think what makes Kull special is a lot of times he's characterized as like philosophical or brooding. I would say the main difference between Kull and Conan is that Conan is always like he's bursting. He's an overcomer who is looking, and he's going to overcome the situation. He believes there's a way out, and he's going to find it. He's going to force that to happen. Kull is going to do that too, but he does it recognizing that things will end, that things will change, and that's just part of his personality. And it's interesting to see that comparison. The Shadow Kingdom is an absolutely fantastic story. It's probably the best Kull story, but maybe the most fun one is Kings of the Night, where it's a Kull and Bran mashup. Bran McMorn, the Pictish chief, conjures Kull from the past to command a little army unit in an important battle he has to win. So Kull is a great book. And then there's the 3 Conan books, Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. These are the early stories, and it's astonishing to me that so early on in crafting the Conan character, Howard was creating some of the very best Conan stories. This one has Tower of the Elephant, it has Black Colossus. The Scarlet Citadel is I think an underrated one. I almost never hear people talk about that story, and it's fantastic. Tower of the Elephant vies with like my top 2, along with Red Nails, which we'll talk about in a couple books. Queen of the Black Coast is interesting. I think it's a strong story, and Bailet in that book is, I think, the prototype for the stronger female characters Howard would create later on. Red Sonja, the Sword Woman, Valeria in Red Nails, and so these are great stories. They have maps of the Hyperborean age, and great illustrations. There's the Tower of the Elephant, the titular character. So I'm a big fan of Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. Second volume is The Bloody Crown of Conan. This has the only Conan novel, but it has People of the Black Circle, which is a very, I think, critically acclaimed Conan story. And then Hour of the Dragon and A Witch Shall Be Born. So this is a good one. But Conquering Sword of Conan has Red Nails. It also has Beyond the Black River, which has the famous line about between civilization and barbarism, the barbarian will always triumph, and just like very dark, very nihilistic. But this is great. Red Nails is just that's that and Tower of the Elephant are the two Conan stories where if I'm ever trying to get somebody to read these, those would be the ones I would pick, and so this is a great volume. Then there's Solomon Kane, who is very distinct from the ruling warrior, trio that Howard created. We have a Puritan adventurer. He's a Puritan, but he is able to form alliances with indigenous people at times. There's swordplay, but it's with a thin rapier, not like the brute force of a sword or an axe. He has a musket. So there's just unique aspects to Solomon Kane. My favorite story is Red Shadows? Yeah, Red Shadows is my favorite Solomon Kane story. And then there are books from Howard that are more genre books. So there are the character books, I showed him many of those, and then there are the genre books. This one is Sword Woman and Other Historical Adventures. These include Cormac Fitzgeoffrey, which is just an all-time great character name. The titular Sword Woman and Blades for France. And then there's the great Red Sonja story, Shadow of the Vulture. So this was a later release and a very, very good one. It collected some stories that needed to get a wider audience. The Horror Stories of Roberty Howard is a great, great volume. So Howard was a correspondent with H.P. Lovecraft, and he has a couple of great Cthulhu mythos stories. The best, of course, is The Black Stone, where we are introduced to those forbidden texts, Una Sprecklin Culten and De Vermis Mysterious. So Howard is, and Worms of the Earth, I believe, is in, by the way, the Crimson Shadows best of. That's a great story. That's the best brand story. But the horror stories are interesting because there are those Cthulhu mythos stories. There are the horror elements that exist in some of the Kane stories, werewolves. But then there are some really interesting horror stories that take place dealing with like the Old West and ghosts, and dealing with Native Americans, and dealing with people who have done terrible things, whether it's the aftermath of slavery in the southeastern U.S., whether it's the aftermath of genocide of Native Americans, and the ways in which that miasma, that guilt continues to push out onto characters in more like updated times. So those stories are interesting, and they still pack a punch. So Pigeons from Hell is a great one. Let's see. Oh, and then I have El Borak and Other Desert Adventures. So these are set more comparatively recently than, of course, the Sword and Sorcery tales. And these are interesting as well. Then I have more science fiction. We'll take a break from stories for a moment to talk about a great steampunk series, Glass Books of the Dreameaters by Gordon Dalquist, in which we seem to be in Victorian London, but it's never actually clear that we're there. This book follows three main characters. There's a young Miss Temple, who is straight out of any of those Victorian novels. There's this Cardinal Chang, who's very mysterious. And then there's Dr. Abelard Svensson, who is incredibly incompetent. And the ways in which strange things are afoot. This book is slightly overwritten. It's slightly too long. In that sense, it's a little bit like the film adaptation of Return of the King, where you're kind of waiting for it to end. But I think it's a very effective book. I know it got some shade, but my wife read it and enjoyed it, and I think what Dalquist tries to do with steampunk here is just kind of take it, to this new exponential level from what we're used to. So people who enjoy steampunk, I would recommend that. The second book in that is The Dark Volume. I don't have the subsequent books, but The Dark Volume. Then back to short stories, The Best of Gene Wolfe. Gene Wolfe is probably most famous for The Earth of the New Sun, The Book of the New Sun, those books, Shadow of the Torturer, Citadel, Claw of the Conciliator, Sword of the Lictor, Citadel of the Autarch. Those books are fantastic. But his stories are also very, very, very good. There's the famous Island of Dr. Death and other stories, but then there's the Death of the Island Doctor. There is the Death of Dr. Island, and the ways in which he kind of moves those around. But Gene Wolfe was an outstanding writer. He was truly a marvelous writer, not just a science fiction fantasy writer, a truly marvelous writer. And his short stories include some of his finest work. I highly recommend it. In a more hard science fiction vein, as promised, we have the great Stanley Robinson, who I think he's most famous for the Mars trilogy. Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. Those are over on this shelf right here. But Robinson is interested in ecology. I think there are just a handful of science fiction writers who are as interested as Robinson in ecology, Frank Herbert being one of them. The way that Dune is actually this incredible book about the environment and ecology, not just space opera. And Stanley Robinson cued on that. And he has some very good stories. This one has, Blind Geometer. That one's good. And that's not just a math teacher saying that. And Black Air. And then, oh my goodness, Glacier and Vinland the Dream. So there's a whole load of great stories in here. I have a sequence of 3 short story collections from Philip K. Dick. Okay, these were published by Citadel Press, so second variety. And I want to say these are the very early short stories that Philip K. Dick published. This has Golden Man? Yeah, Golden Man, which is very different from the film, I want to say, was it Knowing? That Nicolas Cage did that was terrible. Golden Man is interesting. It's far more interesting than the film. Then later on we have Paycheck and The Minority Report and other stories. And these are very, very good volumes. These volumes are better than the second variety volume, but these are great. And I highly, highly recommend both. Paycheck is one I've loaned out many times over the years, and somehow it always returns home, which is great. And then, of course, 2 treasures, Dangerous Visions, and again, Dangerous Visions. These are 2 of the all-time great science fiction anthologies. If you ever see either of them, even if you're not sure that you would be interested, I would recommend just picking it up. Periodically, they've been reprinted as like trade paperbacks. And they are filled and stuffed with fantastic writing. Short stories, longer form stories, just really, really fantastic writing. I cannot recommend these highly enough. Now, I mentioned that the final 6 volumes would head to a pretty forbidding grotto. That's because I have the complete Memoirs of Casanova. The early English translation was done by none other than Arthur Machen, the great Welsh fantastic writer, fantasy writer. And so these books are fantastic. They have this great color. They have these super cool covers. Okay, they sit together really nicely. And Casanova's terrible, but he does give. I will begin with this confession: whatever I have done in the course of my life, whether it be good or evil, has been done freely. I am a free agent. The doctrine of the Stoics or of any other sect as to the force of destiny is a bubble engendered by the imagination of man and is near akin to atheism. I not only believe in one God, but my faith as a Christian is also grafted upon that tree of philosophy, which has never spoiled anything. Knowing what is in the subsequent 2,000 pages, you feel free to cringe. But what a strange, fascinating sequence of memoirs. So we have the Venetian years, Paris in prison, the eternal quest. I've long tried to find this jacket and I just can't. This is not meant to be a euphemism. Adventures in the South. In London and Moscow. And finally, Spanish Prisons. Again, I've looked for this, Jack, and I can't find a copy. But those are the Memoirs of Casanova, and they... something else. So, the only comparison I can think of are the journals of James Boswell. So, these are the top shelf up here, and we'll see what the next weekend holds for us. Let me know if you've read any of these, and if there are certain Philip K. Dick stories that you really enjoy, or certain Howard stories you really enjoy, or anything from Dangerous Visions or Again Dangerous Visions. I would love to hear what some of your favorite short stories from those are. So hope everybody's doing well. Thanks.